o te whatalofa tu mo whaaloa lo whafunga le tino ni tai au.
Whatalofa tu le whafunga le pa ia le tu tupu mai o le tino e mal pa ia la silasi o le whafunga masanya si fonga la mua. Mato whatasi fo il put whasala neima Professor Gros o le Director o le pule fo ilia o le research medical research i le Malaghan Institute o iei ngā utale Victoria University. E whatasi ma le fionga alo Brian Duffy. Whatasi mo so swani fo I whasala mo ino tato polkalame o le sa mato taltana noa mua. Be wha Peritani o mo tato polkalame tai o nei langa I tele hana e whesidia I ana mato taung whaila ia ma ua ma lo I wha liwa tole ngan Samoa. A ia nisi o vaenga tau waina batul wha Samoa taung whaila ia ai wha amaru lua toa tonu o langa leo vai fo taimi toi. La tamu whai no timta upia ia no matoi fo I maila ia malu noa tole ngan Samoa. I say Fatalofa to Tato Malu Taoni, Talofa, good morning. Welcome to Samoa Capital Radio again, Professor Gros.
Talofa Afamasaga. Talofa Brian. Really pleasure to be here. Really pleasure. Really looking forward to the discussions today.
I like your Pacific Island shit. Welcome to Samoa.
I still don't fill it out quite as well as some people in the room, but
Talofa of Yongalo. Graham and Brian, Alo, I already apologize in advance. Given what we got in front of us, we probably do most of this in the English language, and then you'll have to allow your this gentleman to come back to come back here, and I will have to do the translation in Samoan then. But there will be parts of this where we have to try and explain in Samoan for the benefit of the listeners.
I think that's really important, and please jump in where you think it needs to be, just to help, because we really need to get people understanding so they can take control of it for themselves. We need to help where we can, so really happy.
The vision for Samoa Capital Radio is to lead the Pacific broadcasting in this country. And the mission is we entertain, educate, inform, and forward. So we're now at this, informing, and hopefully we can also entertain at the same time and do a bit of education in part of what we're trying to do here. We had the first program, we start talking about the vaccine. And given this is quite topical at present, this is what's happening around the country. And in the Hutt Valley, the program for us, it was the director of the Pacific Health Service in Lower Hutt discussing what's been happening in their campaign on vaccine. Last week on Thursday, we had the vaccination in the Pacific Island Presbyterian Church in Newtown. It's about 246 people turned out for that one.
Fantastic.
And they're looking at 300 in the Hutt Valley. And then they also organize something like a Pacific run event. So, and everybody feel comfortable going along and mixing with people, and then they get their injects in the vaccination. So it's been going well in Wellington. And from what we hear in Auckland, they're also doing well in Auckland.
Yeah, I know we shouldn't say it should be fun, but it's actually a way of actually engaging with the community and actually see it as protecting and supporting our loved ones, because the more people that can be vaccinated, then it protects those people who are actually very vulnerable to getting very serious infection from the virus if it ever gets into the country.
Well, I saw a lot of elderly folks when I went to the one in Newtown. I got my vaccination, my first dose there. And then I look around and I thought, these people come from a household of at least 4 other people. So it's good to have them protected. And then the way they've managed to do it for the Pacific community is that if I'm eligible to have the vaccination, then they said it's all right for you to bring your kids along, and so that you have all of them done at the same time.
And the wonderful thing is, you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting your community and other people. That's the critical thing. As we drive to get as many people as possible vaccinated, we create a thing called herd immunity. And that forms a really protective ring around those people who don't make very good immune responses, or even if they just get a little bit of infection, get very sick. And so it's really good to look after yourself, but also protect your friends and your community by getting vaccinated.
I came away thinking, well, I'm now halfway there. I need my second one.
You haven't had the second one. Be ready.
So I have to go back for the second one. Yeah, the herd immunity, what sort of percentage of the population here needs that, roughly?
Well,
70, 80?
Now, I've got to say right from the beginning, we are all learning together about this COVID-19. This COVID-19 virus has not ever existed before infecting humans. So, as a scientist who's deeply involved in making vaccines and understanding the virus, I may be 2 or 3 months ahead of everyone else in the mainstream media. But I should just make the point, we're learning together. We know an awful lot about the vaccines, but the virus itself, it's always trying to jump ahead of us. So when we talk about herd immunity, we need to have, it used to be maybe 75, 80% of people need to be vaccinated for the herd immunity against the original virus. But if it's true that this India variant or B11.7, whatever it is, or the Delta virus, which is what they call it now, that's much more infectious. And it may be that we need to have 80, 90% of people who are vaccinated to protect those people that can't be protected. And that's an important thing that's changing as the months go by.
I'll just try and translate that part because it's important for people to go and get vaccinated and then they will come back and do the other bit. O le vaenga le matutano a to mo fo tano ngal tai nei. O le fa ali le scientist o le professor. E o e la to scientist e fai tu ni o le fo e learn la to pe a fo le tu langa o le vaccine ia ai la to pe to lu pe lu to lu masina e mo lo to te lo tanga tele mo fa mo mo. Ai o le ntala no le vaenga le pe o na fai tu inga ta to Pacifica. I tono lo hat ia Wellington. I o le la e whamalosi au fo le Professor Gros le mana o le o whaatasi o tangata e whaitu ina ia pui le ngata i mātua ia matangata o ainga. Mai le whaalolonga mai le tō telu tātou le o iai. I o isi wa umaltui mo mua o isi le o whailtui whaalua i o le fwoi whaanga solo atu i ngai loa hat. I mana i fwoi pēr tātou wai whaatas. Graham, let's come back to some of the questions that we've managed. We still have people asking about what is the difference between Astrazeneca and Pfizer COVID-19. The thing about the Pacific community, they talk to their members in Australia, their family members in Australia, they talk to them in Samoa, and they are receiving not the Pfizer, but Astrazeneca. And he said, so why are you people doing that? And why have we got this? And what's the difference?
Well, of course, we've got the best vaccine. I'm sorry for our Australian colleagues, but joking aside, there are actually two very good vaccines. They've got very good safety profiles. The Pfizer vaccine has got tremendous way of stimulating immunity, but it's a very new technology in the sense that we haven't really had a major vaccine rollout with RNA technology. The Astrazeneca uses parts of a virus that we all get as children, as a common cold virus that actually causes a common cold. And the scientists have been quite clever in the way they've just put part of the COVID-19 into that cold virus. And what's good about that vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, is that it's very stable, it's very easy to make. The virus makes itself, the common cold virus makes a lot of itself, and it's actually can be shipped all over the world relatively easily, and it still works. The trouble with the RNA vaccine, it's a very good vaccine, but it actually has to be stored in very strong conditions. So it's really how you make it is the difference, and actually what it's made from. The RNA vaccine is made from a little bit of RNA, which comes from a little part of the virus, plus some fat around it, and the AstraZeneca, it's part of another virus, a common cold virus, with a bit of the COVID-19 virus mixed in. It's very safe, and it just makes alongside itself. And the other good thing about the AstraZeneca one is we know we can make really strong immunity against it as well. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, when they hear things about blood clot, and that's when they start people
to put it in perspective. You know, when you look at the numbers of people who get a blood clot, and we don't really know why that happens, it's one in the orders of 1 in a million. So I'm not sure how many Samoan people there are, but there will be the possibility of no one in Samoan people ever having a blood clot, because is there 1 million Samoan people around the world?
There's only 200 in Samoa, probably triple or 4 times that around the world.
It's very hard to think in terms of these numbers. These are such rare events that it basically would be impossible for a Samoan person to have this reaction because there's not enough Samoan people.
Well, if you look at what's happening in India and then now in the Pacific and Fiji, it's still growing. Then you ask the question. I heard in the news this morning that from Samoa, we got this news bulletin that said people were very reluctant to receive the vaccine. Now they've got people sick, and everybody is now wanting to get vaccinated.
It's terrible to say this, but it only takes a few deaths or people getting very sick, and people realise how dangerous the real virus is, and everyone will then want the vaccine because it's the only way to protect yourself from this virus and protect the other people in your community.
Right, thank you for that. We also have people still apprehensive about the safety of the Pfizer vaccine being used in New Zealand. Could you please help allay their fears?
Yeah, I really can reassure everyone in the tens of millions of people who've received the Pfizer vaccine all around the world, there has not been a major serious reaction. There's been no death, there's been no problem from that. Right. In fact, I'm looking forward to your response for your second jab. The first reaction you don't usually feel very much. The second one, your arm swells up and feels a bit sore, but really, you're a big boy, you'll be fine. But there's been no major reaction against the virus that concerns authorities.
You met Savalina, our news producer, just as we come in. Her mother, 92, has had her second dose 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And she's fine.
Yeah. Good.
92-year old lady.
That's what's on the record. People around the world, tens of millions of people, and there hasn't been a major reaction, to stop the vaccine rollout. It would have been stopped if there'd been anything like that, and people have been watching very carefully. So we can be really reassured in New Zealand. We've got the safest vaccine there is on the market at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. What's the implication of COVID-19 vaccine on fertility? A young woman asked the question, she's
very
thinking about having a family.
Very, I'm really glad to have this question because how do you know? You're stimulating your immune system. You are perfectly safe to think about having children, and getting the vaccine. And in fact, it makes your children safer for you to have the vaccine beforehand. Yes. You can protect your children, the mother's antibodies go through to it's a very natural process. It's good for mum to have everything first, have the children, and vaccination is a way of shortcutting and making sure she can make her children safe, and it won't affect the ability to have children either. There have been plenty of people having children who've had the vaccine and they've had good, healthy children.
I'll quickly sum up some of these key things. Ole vainga le tala no nei le se sengo le tui fo le tui e tanga te Australia Samoa mai nei olo e fa polengo nisi ile tulango le sefe ma le tawo ole o toi fa manatu fo ile fa malosi au fo tato malol tao nei e tasi le miliona tanga te ono afia ile tui na ole Astrazeneca ia mai afu la le miliona le ia aton le atose miliona tanga Samoa mo Samoa la vala tona lusela ia tu se pe fa tu no numero tanga te lo ifafu ia tonu ai le se su tato ona faina a lo tau sa iri pela to e fa ma ni po la tonu le mele mo ile tanga te ile fo ile pe ile tulango le toto ile clocked ai ole tulanga na ole sila fasili le tawo te le fasili tu ina mai pe ia se afianga le tuile mo nai le tu pau o tamaitai tala to ye tene tala vo alela a fa mo faia a inga ma faia fa nau pe ono a fia ita maiti ma le anga ilu mo ole tene mo le e ole tali le vo il professor e ma nia fo le ye mo le tui tonu e ai le faia le pepe a wai o me o mo le tonu tina ia e pasi atu le fa na o londo winga la fio lolo fo e pui e la to mo lumana. Thank you. I think that was a good question when it came across. Obviously, this young lady was thinking ahead with all what she's hearing. She's thinking about 5-10 years ahead because we haven't had a clinical sort of test or trial. All this was rushed out and everybody's now getting vaccinated.
That is better than getting the virus. There's no choice about this really because you don't want the virus. Because one, you don't make as strong an antibody response. You won't protect yourself or your family. I'm really looking forward to the next question as well.
Right. This is where even I got a bit...
well, we've got Brian here who's going to help. Brian's going to help me on this one.
In your last program, you mentioned that your team would look to extend the research for making COVID-19 vaccine by moving from spike protection or protein to RNA and mRNA. please remind our listeners again about the meaning of, firstly, spike protein, then secondly, RNA, and thirdly, mRNA.
Okay, I'll try my best, and Brian's going to follow up because there's some things here. The spike protein is actually the part of the virus uses to infect our bodies, infect our cells. If the virus didn't have that spike protein, or if the spike protein is covered with our protective antibody response that we make, the virus can't get into a cell. So both the RNA vaccines and the Astrazeneca vaccines make spike protein. Now, we have developed a vaccine here in New Zealand based around a protein spike protein vaccine using the traditional ways. Now, this is where Brian knows about this. We need a 1,000 to 2,000 litre container to make that kind of virus. That's the traditional AstraZeneca way. If we can convert that to making messenger RNA vaccine, we only need a 10 litre container. The power of the RNA vaccine approach is that we can really downscale the size of the manufacturing process, and we can make enough for New Zealand and the Pacific with just a small little machine. Whereas with the old traditional spike, which we started off with, and that's all that was available around the world, and as Brian would know, having worked in fermentation and stuff like that, 1,000 litre or 2,000 litre manufacturing vessel is very difficult and very complicated to work with, but having a little 10 litre one, amazing difference. So we want to move forward and convert ours to a messenger RNA platform. And Brian, I can leave you to discuss the difference between RNA and messenger RNA. Is that okay?
Thank you.
O vaenga I le whainga mo spike protein. So vaenga le pui ai le mo virus. Mo protein nga. E pipi ia ele cellular tino. Ta ma whaile ona a fia oi. A tulanga ia mei o le RNA ma le mRNA. Kusa le mo le messenger RNA. Tu sai o tulanga na o le vaenga na e toe ngao sia le si kopi. E si kopi o le virusi. Ona o tulanga ia mo spike protein pe on ta o e crab e te le volume pe te le me 2,000 litre to 1,000 litre from the spike. Yeah, Pfizer in Apple used to do that. And but ole tulanga le mana o mia le sui le RNA e la te le volume e mana o mia tulanga la na ona ole cellular tino e o le vaenga le la te whaia kopi o se vaenga fou pe fo tātou o tātou a mana mia le protein o le lima po le laulu po le atin lima o le RNA la e whaia kopi e la titi la se vaenga mana mia ai o le protein spike protein ke le mana mia tulanga la e fiu tau whai se tui pui ai le RNA ele tiki de vaina na mia mo le mo tui the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. Now the question then is, will the human cell be affected by the incoming mRNA?
No. Okay. And that's the other really good thing about RNA. You're not changing the DNA, you're not changing the DNA of the cell. Yes. What happens with the RNA, it just goes into the first part of the cell, in the cytoplasm. And go home and ask your kids, what is cytoplasm?
Yeah, they should.
And, let's get those family conversations going.
Yes.
And it never goes into the nucleus where the DNA is, and then it lasts for a few hours, and then it gets chopped up naturally. So the RNA just disappears, and that's the way RNA works. But in the meantime, it makes a little bit of protein, makes the vaccine on the surface of the spike protein on the surface of the cell, our cells, and then we start making an immune response to it. But that's why it's so safe, the RNA. It just doesn't last very long.
Thank you. Then he can explain what cytoplasm is.
Well, the school kids all know, don't they?
Well, tulanga plasma ne mana umia tu solvaenga le tutono le cell.
Yeah.
Ti per ta mai fel wa sole per la fe au si sole tonu la RNA.
Yeah.
Tu sai ale aida se medium foi ngale postulanga na fel wa e RNA e le ma fai foi la na fa se copy. Per tulanga la na o le pera ona taua. Ele ia fia fu la le meu DNA. Wa DNA ku so o ngai mo moli mai e le meu pa se photocopy machine foi ngale sa we copy le e mo mori mai fa por RNA e sa we fe copy e le a fia fo la le me ole nucleus ngale DNA e mana mi ngale RNA sa fa fo fe copy
good. I'm now happy. I'm happy. So my body is not being changed or
the messenger RNA goes in and then it just gets broken up and goes away. Like all the other RNA you're making every day of your life. All your cells are making RNA all the time.
Right.
The vaccine RNA goes and joins it for a while and then it gets just chopped away and no DNA integration, no cell integration. Gone.
Very good. Now I will go for my second dose. And the other question is, given that everybody will have all this second dose, is it likely to get second infection with COVID-19?
This is a really important issue for people to understand. There'll be some people whose immune system is just too weak and not strong enough. They won't make a very good immune response and they may not be able to be protected against. Now, there's a real concern, and some of my colleagues at the hospital, the cancer clinicians, they really want people to go and get vaccinated before they start going down to do cancer therapy, because the cancer therapy, the chemotherapy, takes the immune system away and they can't get vaccinated then. And if the virus comes in, so it's really important that people, cancer patients, get vaccinated first before they start their cancer therapy. So there'll be some people who'll be quite vulnerable if they wait too long to get vaccinated. So and other people on different drugs. The anti-gout drug is okay, that won't suppress you, but other drugs like steroids and things like that, they stop the immune system from really responding to a vaccine. And unless you made the right response, you could have 2 jabs and still not be protected. So that's why you've got to talk to the nurse giving the vaccine, say what medication you're on, and they can decide, say, come off your medication please, get your vaccination, then you can go back onto your medication.
Great. Thank you. Brian, in fact, tell you ole facility na tu atu. Umanene fa yo tu e lua ia. Pe to e ono mo o ile COVID-19. Ya mana ia fo ila tati atu ia.
Ma ia tulanga lewo fa silingia onga tulanga ia pe ona ta o me o ton fitingo le orkanesa. O vai la ona fa maina. E fa mo la lo ile pui na fa natura. A fa peala e fa maina le tui pui. E le ama se ona e te le sona ona. Wa pe o tui le fa lu terminei. Tui mo lo tui mo la fa ia. Na to su pasenge ni maros.
Yeah.
E to mana o mia la le la lona lua. E o no le iba lima. Ai fa peala la to ie e alu ton fiting orkanesa. Ia e iba ila autona e fa ama wala lo e pui nga fa natura
ortino la balato
ortino ina ia mafai o nga lue le baila e le mafai la fa o nga le baila o nga kanesa to lo atu matui pui o le ia nga atoa e le ia nga tu pui ma o no fesili le fa absingia pe to e mafai pe o mantano tato o kamera o te fu o mena le fautua ina fa nga pele la pupuni wai e tu feto me stangata le sa malsiama ele se vai moltino e fa no te e lo to matauri le mana va le e lo to e malsiama ton le se lo gala fa le pupuni no ta o fonga I think we're going to come to this question. We already mentioned the Delta before, but during the week, they came up with this new, and I thought, why change it? You fix it when it's not broken.
This is not fair. Afamasaga is quite right. You scientists, why are you doing these names and changing it? You're just getting your heads around, the UK, the India virus, and so on. I think this is the modern world, and I think that we're familiar with the concept that. I don't want to say the PC brigade, but they're worried that if you give a name to a virus, given the country, it stigmatizes the country. And so I'm sure actually the Samoan people wouldn't care. If there's a Samoan virus, they go, yay, it's on the world stage again.
First time ever.
or the Cook Island flu virus or something like that. However, there's a certain concern about stigmatization, and we can see how politicians can use it. They can use it. I think we saw with Trump, he was trying to use it on the Wuhan virus.
China virus,
and that's what that was to stop. Now, unfortunately, the scientific names like B11.7, 1.1, I can't use. You know, I get lost as to which is the variant where. And I would prefer to have the original countries' names, because I don't stigmatize those countries. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, omega, epsilon, they're standard scientific names that scientists use when they don't know what to name something. And it becomes just a simpler way. Now, I would just urge people, if anything, just learn about the Delta virus, the India virus. And that's the one we're really quite concerned about at the moment. That has really changed its infectivity profile. It's getting closer and closer to that level that measles has. So I think you don't have to learn all the viruses, but maybe just focus on one. And distinguishing between alpha, beta, gamma is just too hard.
Thank you. I think I will follow you on this, because if I know it's an Indian variant, then I'd say to myself, there's no way I'm going to go there until this is cleared up. But if they talk about Delta, that doesn't tell me anything.
It doesn't tell you anything.
So unfortunately, don't know why the WHO has gone and changed things to make it harder for people like me to know where not to travel to while it's quite strong.
So, but it's just scientists trying to meet the needs of the politicians, and it's not really the scientists' idea. We think that the name, of the original country of origin is actually quite powerful and useful in trying to understand what's gone on. But this is the modern world. We have to live with it.
Ole vaingalen matanone o faingoanga fo i WHO pole malo o fatas ole fartonga so fo maloloina. Ole wo maingo fo I faingo e fa ingo le o al scientist le tal no professor ele mam la mo pele me su e fo le faingo fiale me pronta wo intia ole very pole vaingale o so mo intia e mam la mo fie mo fo la to afa pe o le te fie malanga te fa o le lalang ye e te ro nu e te le fia ro la pise fa mai ia langa o me ia le tam fai a wene I pe lau fai e no ia le very clear mo mai ia tu langa na ale mana e mo ia le professor lai fai ngo ia me fai ngo fia la tonu fai nga wenga ile tu langa le I know that Cuba was the first small nation to make their own vaccine and managed to vaccinate their own people without any approval from FDA or other regulatory authorities. Also in March of this year, they approved their second vaccine candidate for the stage clinical trial. In your last program, you mentioned that you have successfully discovered a vaccine for COVID-19. The question is, when is this going to come out? Professor, when are we going to get
this is where I feel the pressure. When are we going? You talk something. This is the trouble with saying something on this radio station. They hold you to it and they'll bring me back again and again until I've delivered the job. I like it. Good pressure. So we are halfway through our estimate. Now, obviously, we've never done this here in New Zealand before. You're right to mention Cuba. They are famous for delivering vaccines, which actually have proven quite effective vaccines in some cases. However, here in New Zealand, they'll never let us deliver a vaccine without going through the appropriate regulatory authorities and meeting FDA standards. The real principle here in New Zealand is that only the safest thing, medicines and vaccines are ever delivered. So we actually have to go through that process. So I think that by middle of this time next year, we should have our candidate really pretty much wrapped up as far as the science is concerned. Then we face the regulatory hurdles of, is it safe, doing a safety trial, etc. So I promise you, at the moment, all things going well, and I can't predict everything.
I write down the
I can do it now. I feel the sweat coming up behind my ears. But I think we should be in a good shape about this time next year, or maybe a little bit later, to have a candidate ready to progress through the regulatory processes and things like that. And maybe starting a limited small safety trial at the end of next year.
And then when you get to that stage, what else happened after that?
Well, that's the good thing about if we convert to an RNA vaccine. Then it's the procedures, the manufacturing procedures are so much simpler. We should be able to roll out enough vaccine pretty quickly. Now, what we're trying to aim with our vaccine is not just do something like the current Pfizer vaccine, where we worry that the immunity won't last for very long, maybe 1 to 2 years. We're trying to make a vaccine that will last for a very long time. So people only have to get their 2 injections, or maybe only 1 injection once every 10 years. So we're trying to change the way the vaccines can work, and that it's a much longer lasting protective immunity.
And do you envisage us packaging our own vaccine here, or?
Well, that's the wonderful thing. The reason why we actually have got a group down in Timaru of all places, and I shouldn't say of all places, in wonderful Timaru, there's actually a powerful, well-organised vaccine manufacturing group. They're a commercial operation, and they do fill and finish into little glass vials. They make vaccines and therapies that go all around the world. They do it for animal vaccines and for human therapies. And we're very lucky to have them. They're called South Pacific Sera.
Oh, so
South Pacific Sera. Let's go, and we'll give them the job, and they'll do it for us.
So you're just waiting for you to finish your part.
In fact, there's you now, and there's them saying, "Hey, Graham, where's that vaccine? We want to start tomorrow." So yes, that's the way it is.
I was just thinking, in terms of the cost of this country. We've had Honorable Alpito on air here, and then we asked the question, how much does it cost for one dose? Yeah. And he said, it's about 250. Yeah. And then we thought, around the world, someone is making a lot of money out of this vaccine.
Yes.
And if we finished what you're working on, that will probably help bring the cost down for this country and the Pacific, if we can help out the Pacific.
That is our vision. And that's one reason why Cuba has not gone through the FDA, because the costs of meeting some of those regulatory is just enormous, because you've got to do trials, you've got to wait, you've got to keep people employed for many years, all working on the same vaccine. That is tremendous cost. So we hope that using the new RNA technology platform, we'll be able to speed up the process. It reduces the cost, and also New Zealand will have its own vaccine distributed here. It's so much cheaper than shipping it all around the world. So that is a big push for going with the government. So anyone who's got influence on the government, lobby hard that New Zealand has to become resilient itself and develop its own vaccine manufacturing potential. I think it's really important for us and the Pacific and our future.
Sure. Ole vaenga le talno ni fo ipe o yele tui le o le sata o el professor pokalamutu nai. O mawela tole tui a ye vaenga le ta pena tu e na ia o lo le tain fa pene lo tausanga la sau. I on ave lo le fa ye le si vaenga na o le trial. Ia na umalola ia mo tatou stulanga e ngosi ale vaila autono New Zealand. Le tui la le mo COVID-19. Le na no fa tu pe fa i ne le tui e ngosi ne ava mai no fanga lo Timaru. O ina me fai ona tu e fatasi de vaenga lea ia esa o le na avel fisidi e le no le o Cuba pe o ala to foi la to tu ele ano ala to e foi ngal langi le fa pe fa maunia mai o le FDA ia ai le ai o le vaenga na o lo fai la to mai le fa a maunia fo e le professor tu langa lea fa fa le tlo mat fatasi ma professor Graham Gros o le pule le o le Malaghan Institute fa pe malo Brian Duffy. Ia tatano fo tulanga o ele vaccine po le COVID-19 temine. Ina I mtau pun tano mo stem matu tatano to le malo fa ato tu tano ngane ia le se tau fa o tu na fisili fa o motor tatu por kalame. I understand there is they're looking at a clinical trial to find out the impact of this vaccine on our Pacific and Maori community. Yeah. And then the trial is down Christchurch, and I thought, why not have it in Auckland and Wellington, where the majority of Pacific Islanders reside?
Yeah. It's actually to help the people in Auckland and Wellington, but what we have to do is a trial that runs out as quick as possible. It's actually a clinical study, because we're very concerned. Some Maori and Pacific often carry a overproportion of the burden of, say, type 2 diabetes and gout, and no one knows whether when they get the vaccine, do they respond quite as well as they should do. So we want to get that information done as quickly as possible, and if we find out, for example, that people with gout or people with type 2 diabetes don't make quite enough antibody response, then we better say, hey, let's recommend a third jab to get the titers right up, so make sure that people are protected. The worst thing that could happen is people get 2 jabs, and because of their type 2 diabetes or because of their gout, as an example, they don't make quite enough of an immune response, and then they're more vulnerable to the virus when the virus comes here, because once the borders come down, virus will come across.
What prompted this study? Did somebody say, oh, better check this out to make sure it works?
I think, yes. Well, that's our job.
Yeah,
that's my job.
Right.
And it's what Dr. Fran Priddy, she's worked all over the world. She's worked with the Ebola vaccine in Africa. She's worked with the HIV vaccine. And she was just concerned that we really need to make sure that our people here, our Pacifica Maori people, and over 65s, which includes me, are safe, and that we do respond well to the vaccine as well as need to be. Because up till now, the vaccine's been tried out in healthy Americans, all this. We need to have our profiles tested too.
Thank you. O le vaenga le tanoia o ngā tēne mo o tau le mau le ngase o le diabetes ma le gout. Ai le polisuka. E le ngā ruenga le atou nei peo on sao no le professor. E ele le fo o le vaenga le fat siaki ele tūlanga o le afianga o le atou umana tu i le COVID-19. Mo pe po le lei le fo le whaonga ino le vaila au tino tangata i maua i le suka ma le gout po le ngungu. O le lai vava ai e whai loroi Kalai State in ofisi le lai mo le whai lunga e o kilani po Wellington e le to te le Samoa Maori. Au lana i Itali. O lo whai le lo tangata Pasifika le o ai au ngai benefiti e tātou e nei lunga i ima mai u. Au lo whai e whai mo tangata i lunga tu le onsu lima. Pe on sao nol professor. E leo mai lo le taimi nei pe i eise suinga po le te e fo i po le whaanganga le tino o le vaila o le whatu tono tātou. Pea wha peo nai te ngase le suka ia male mai o le ngungu. Ai e uma lor sa ilinga le ona i lor ato tole la to whaamani le tūlanga iei. Ai peo o le whaia la to ona o le fesilia la to siaki po o paongale le tuine i mo tangata o lo mau i ngase nei. Brian, o ngai sa o le vai?
Nai, sa o le tūlanga na ono o le e pe e vape tūlanga le ono e pe o le whaitau o le numera atoa na o vai ngara vea ma Pasifika. Ai ono ta whaamuri mai rola i o whaongai na Pasifika rawa na tau ai pe o le tau sue atu. Pe se sengo o le tali mai o le tino o tūlanga na.
One of the things that came up over the years now, they started with P and then now COVID-19, when they go and check in the wastewater and come up with some sample and say, this is what's present in this water. And I thought, with all the pollutants, the stuff that goes through in the water, how do they know and I thought, I'll ask Graham the question next time when he comes on.
Good on you.
You see all this, the soap and all the stuff that goes, the chemicals that go, and they come up with some samples of COVID-19 presence in the water.
Actually, quite frankly, I'm amazed they can pick up any signature, given that there's so low levels of COVID-19 infection in this country. However, overseas, where there's a lot of infection, they've used it to detect and just get a sense of how much virus is going around. Once we lower the borders, it may be quite important, because then we have the virus circulating.
Correct.
And that's the only thing I think the best value is for the future, and we may be able to track where virus is. I'm amazed that we can detect it. I agree with all your points. There's so much that goes into the sewage system, but you can still pick up these little bits of RNA using sophisticated genetic techniques, like what Brian's done. But yes, it's incredible that we can pick a signature with such a small number of people. But of any practical use, none at the moment, but for the future, once we have live virus circulating, and it may be if the virus goes into animals like dogs and cats, we'll be able to see that as well then. So it's good to have that process for exploring our environment.
Manelo fa Samoa il vai ngale to explain you check the chemicals.
That's called a hospital pass.
If after you tau il vai ngale o tau ono wo yesu so ngai o fa tino nei vai taimi I le yesau no yesau wo le foi no foi ngai ngai tulanga le ai o le facility e le pe o whatau ina nei taimi na tuna susuenga. Ai le tau leini si o la bebe le whamai. O to inga susuenga tau whai intia ma tu no ula tele. Mo the number, got a bigger number, got a shading of virus.
By millions of people.
New Zealand. Pero tu langala na le whapsiling ito yung susuenga le. Wala si mea. O tupene na tanga mai amato telo susuenga.
He's saying the money spent on that should have come to all research.
Yes. Exactly.
Ole vaenga tonu ale mo si whawhonganga le tinu. Ia so ngale o fai I le COVID-19 o le mo I fai fo yo to le sa mai tato falta ele o fale e se alu tonu ma o to ala mo so ngai mo le COVID o fasilin fai fa fiana la to lo o le COVID-19 ale telo le si mo la pisile o fatasi e o le pe le tau tonu wa ila o nei me le ana mai tu pena ave fai so ngai ya nga lo le vai na there are some people still, and even a politician who keep harping on about getting the borders open so that we can grow the economy. But I think we are doing very well with the, so I don't know what the thinking is from your area. But even the cruise ships this week, the industry, they've been calling about having a ship bubble between New Zealand and Australia.
Very, very risky.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Totally unnecessary. If you ask my opinion, it would be irresponsible to open the borders and even extending to the ship bubble. Why? Because we haven't got anywhere near the level of people vaccinated. We need to have at least 4.5 million people or 4 million people vaccinated. Right. We're not even up to the 1 million part. No. If we let the virus come in now, all the work, all the pain, all the economic suffering that everyone's gone through would be for wasted. We need to get to that herd immunity of about 80% people vaccinated. We need to make sure before we open our borders. Now, of course, the Prime Minister and the government will make the call when the borders should come down, but we're nowhere near that yet. And I think that I really feel for those people who put their heart and lives into developing tourism-based industries and the universities who actually put their whole economy around educating overseas students. It's really hard for them. We've got to remember, people are losing their livelihood. So I'm not saying we just dump them, but the government needs to help them. But lowering the borders and letting the virus in, no. We must not do that right now until at least 4.5 million people are vaccinated.
You'll probably have the same response if I say about this Olympics game that they're still pushing to happen in
I don't know what they're thinking, because it only takes one person to get really sick and die. What are they going to do with that? Are they going to be, the way the world is, the way we have no tolerance for any kind of death and mayhem, they're crazy.
Vainga mane fo mo fafonga le to le ata pisa ai si o le fai fo le tono malo e te talata to polis mo le mala isa lo to ba Australia mai si nom tato o le tale professor o fai le tulanga wa yese si te o madiu te ale o le si tulanga ngonga no e tato si le pui malu tato o tulanga fo le Tokyo pe on tale no ye e le tel tonu e pe fa fiona fai le fa wa ulta longa ya o le tele fa mai na fo ya tunu. I noticed the G7 summit in Cornwall, all these the rich people, countries, so-called rich. They're now thinking, I think America started by pledging 500 million doses for worldwide, and then the rest put it in the same number. And I thought, if Graham was hurry up and do his vaccination, then New Zealand, we don't need that help. We can just give it to the Pacific.
Exactly. No, I think that I think we really have. This has been a real lesson for New Zealand and the Pacific. We are in this thing together, and in the future, we've got to build a stronger, more resilient network of people. We went and visited Honourable Minister Seal, and just to ask, well, how's it working? Is New Zealand doing all that it can to help the Pacific Islands? And he said, made it very clear, they are sovereign countries. We respect them in their own right, but New Zealand has actually making all things available that these countries and the different island countries want. So we should be reassured that New Zealand's doing its bit, but remember, they get to decide what comes into their country and what help they receive. So I think it was very, very humbling to meet Minister Seo and just have him explain to us just how he's very carefully sort of and understands the role we should play, and not just be like Big Brother saying, do this, do that, but actually let the Pacific people decide for themselves.
It's very hard when you leave Samoa, come here, and you want to go back and tell them.
Tell them what to do.
You need to go and offer it to them. You don't tell them.
Exactly. And I think it was really good that why not? Because no matter what community we're talking about in New Zealand, whether it's the West Coast down in the South Island or the Northland community, the Ngāpuhi, we don't tell them what to do. We invite them if they want to be part of something. So I think why not for the Pacific Islands as well.
Yeah, but it's good that the global community are now looking at coming from the poorer countries.
I think what's really the thinking behind this is that trying to raise the level of attention of all these rich countries from themselves. They've all been through hell with a lot of people dying. What they don't realize is that unless we get rid of the virus globally, across all the other countries, this virus will get worse and worse, it'll mutate, it'll get more. We've got to actually help all the countries to get rid of the virus from all the people. It's our responsibility as citizens of the world, and we shouldn't forget that.
Just with all the research that's been done, how many mutation or variants are we likely to see with this particular?
I hope we've come to the end. Delta is it. We actually are on a journey we don't know. I read a scientific paper just last night, and we've maybe one or two more mutations, and then any further mutations and the virus starts to get in trouble and it can't infect human cells anymore. It's got its limitations too. It can't become a supervirus because any further mutations make other parts of it not work very well.
I hope we get to the point where it just sort of self-destruct.
No. While there is a susceptible group of animals, whether it's a cat, a dog, a human, they'll go on trying to live. And they'll try and live within us. So until we've actually got all those immune responses, protective antibodies out there, they can go on infecting us because we're completely susceptible.
Ole vaingalen talnoi nei o le tulang o sosoani tato mo motul Pasifika ia le sala to fono ma aupito le fionga ia aupito ia o la ia tulang fa va ma lo en fai on sosoani tato ma avele le ofoi Samoa ma motul Pasifika ia tala no fo le sosoani ma lo fa ta si fono le na o matuni va su tonai o le fa pe fai le ofo le biliona le fa o tu ia le o fa ma no mo Pasifika ia o le tūlanga na i ele sausoani fo tātou. E na fisiri le i el mele fisu ia i ale siama nei, pe whaafia o na fisu ia. E o le wha pe tau sia tō titi o le taimi e le tō e mwhai o na whai el tūlanga le ina whaingo fiele mo tātou. Brian, and we see how the time runs out of us, we're over. But thank you very much. Perhaps you might have a message for our community who still are trying to decide whether to take the vaccine and then try and encourage them.
I'd say be brave. Think of how you will actually protect other people in your community, your children or your parents. The vaccine is all safe. It's proven to be safe through millions of doses being given to millions of people. It's a question, please understand it. Try and work out, make yourself for yourself. Don't do it under being bullied. Do it with calmness and knowledge. But I can assure you, it's a very good vaccine. We're very lucky to have it here in New Zealand. And it's the best way to protect yourself and your family and your community by getting vaccinated.
Thank you very much, Professor and Brian. Alo, thank you for making your time available.
And thank you for helping me, Brian. Thank you for helping me with the translation.
And wearing your Pacific Island shirt this morning. It's good to have it in Samoa Capital Radio.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, all the best for you.
Leading Pacific radio station in the Pacific.
Yes. All the best for your work today and the future. And then, by the way, I think I've already communicated. I want to bring the team to have a visit and have a look at all the facility.
Love to host you. Really would. Yeah, love to. Please come. Okay. And I really would bring them all.
Thank you. Ia o tatou por kalamina mwhaitu whase stemi mato e taltanoa tire tole ma Brian Mamalo. Ia o temi leo wha amno tatou mo fu stemi to talanoa masina fo o temi nei whato wha soifua.